Thank you very much, Dr. Baravesh, for that upbeat presentation, and look forward to continuing our conversation here on stage very, very shortly, and also taking questions from you in the audience. But right now, it's full steam ahead, ladies and gentlemen. We continue our presentation now with our keynote speaker, Karl Gernandt, the chairman of the board of directors at Kuehne and Nagel International AG, one of the world's leading logistics providers. It was back in 2008 that Klaus Michael Kuehne himself, majority shareholder of Kuehne and Nagel International, appointed Karl as his successor, and he became CEO of Kuehne's privately held Kuehne Holding AG and member of the board of the trustees of the Kuehne Foundation in Switzerland and the Klaus Michael Kuehne Foundation in Hamburg. Since May of 2011, he's been chairman of Kuehne and Nagel International AG. He received his MBA at the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. In addition to his roles with Kuehne & Nagel, he is vice chair of the board of directors of Hapag-Lloyd AG Hamburg. Now, over its 125-year history, big anniversary year for the firm, Kuehne & Nagel has evolved from a traditional international freight forwarder to one of the world's leading global providers of innovative logistics and supply chain solutions. Its approximate 6,300, make that 63,000 employees around the world, operate in more than 100 countries around the world. In ocean freight, Kuehne & Nagel is ranked #1 globally. Please welcome our keynote speaker, ladies and gentlemen, Karl Gernandt.
Thank you, Frank, for the kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here as the keynote speaker at the largest and most influential sea freight industry conference. But to tell you the truth, I'm a little surprised that Kuehne & Nagel was invited, given that we are a freight forwarder, and we all know that most often the keynote speaker this conference here has been a senior carrier executive. However, Kuehne & Nagel was so interested in playing a major role at this TPM event that we somehow convinced our majority shareholder, Klaus Michael Kuehne, to take a significant stake in Hapag-Lloyd in order to qualify as a speaker here on this podium. I think the money was well spent. But all kidding aside, and regardless of my business affiliations, it's an honor. It's really an honor to be selected to address this audience of industry professionals. Once again, good morning, everyone. Try this little experiment the next time you are at a party or a gathering of people. Ask the person next to you if they know how the shirt or blouse they are wearing came to be worn by them. How did it get to them so they could select it from their closet to match their jacket, slacks, and even the color of their eyes? You will find that almost no one, other than people in our industry, has an idea of what goes into the process of assessing alternative production locations, planning and managing a supply chain, consolidating cargo, shipping the cargo, distributing the merchandise, and finally getting it on a shelf in a store or in a warehouse ready for deliver to an internet shopper. And on top of it, nobody knows the price tag which stands behind all this. For the described shirt, it's less than 1% to be paid for all the logistics, and it sums up to nearly 20,000 miles of transportation distance. People are wearing one of the biggest stories of the past 200 years on their backs, but many of them don't know it. But all of us in this room, we know it. It is the story of trade and transportation. And this is what I would like to talk about today. The place of trade and ocean transportation in the world today and where it might take us in the future. It is unfortunate that not more people are aware of how the world of trade, logistics, and transportation works, because these things have dramatically changed for the better, and they will continue to change and improve the world we live in. Think of the things that have radically changed the world in the past 100 years. Radio and television, the integrated circuit, the airplane, computers, the internet, and trade and transportation. Are they equal in bringing positive changes to the world and to people's life? We are all part of this changing industry. I would like to spend a couple of minutes and cheerleading for the industry, but also laying out some issues that need to be addressed if we at Kuehne Nagel and you and your companies are to continue changing the world and prospering while we do it. Let's start with a little quiz. What do a British economist, an investor from 200 years ago, an American who started his transportation company with $120 investment in a truck, and a Chinese Communist Party revolutionary have in common? These three could be the start of a great three-man walked into the bar joke, but they aren't. In reality, they all helped to lay the groundwork for the global trade and transportation system and the modern world that it supports. The first gentleman is David Ricardo. I'm sure some of you know the name established the logical and economic underpinnings of trade and showed the world how comparative advantage, in those days it was named comparative advantage, the concept of countries making what they're good at relative to other countries. And this trade could increase production and welfare. For most people today, especially for us in this room, this seems obvious. Today we often quote competitive, not comparative, but competitive advantage of nations by Michael Porter, Harvard Business School. But in 1817, it was not obvious when Ricardo did his work. His groundbreaking efforts set us on a course based on trade, making everyone better off. Let's jump a little bit. In 1956, Malcolm McLean, a trucker from the North Carolina, had a simple yet revolutionary idea. The idea was to separate the truck body from the set of wheels to create a box that could seamlessly move between modes of transportation, from over the road to water transport without exposing the cargo to the elements or theft at the time, as dramatically improving the economics of water transport. He made what was not possible in the past. And our today's world is not to be understood without that, what we call nowadays the containerization. And third gentleman, when Mao died in 1976, it was not entirely clear who would emerge as the new leader of the People's Republic. The person who did emerge was an old hand with a different and more pragmatic view on China and the world. This was the man who did not care if the cat was black or white as long as it caught mice. Deng Xiaoping started China on the road to become a, let's call it, centrally managed capitalist country. He set the country on the path of economic liberalization that has brought China to a position as a powerhouse of the world trade and the second largest economy in the world. The investment were directed into the economic development and only to a lesser degree into military system. But finally, the Chinese model ruled out the economic world and established the triad power with China and the interfaces of Europe and America. This could not have happened without trade, and the trade could not have happened without containerized ocean transportation. We all stand on the shoulders of these three giants. Our company, Kuehne Nagel, like Frank mentioned, it was founded 125 years ago in 1890, and we have been fully participating in the containerization revolution since the beginning. We opened offices around the globe, for example, in Hong Kong, 1965, in the US, 1966, and in mainland China in 1973. Since the advent of international containerized ocean transportation, global trade has been growing at an average of 5% annually for more than 30 years. In this period, there have only been 3 years of negative growth. That's an amazing record for a generation of economic development. Over this period, trade has provided US consumers with a mind-blogging array of goods, from car parts to cookware to computers. And trade has increased incomes in the US by 1 trillion, trillion with a T, per year in the post-World War period. Increased incomes by 1 trillion. And it has raised the standard of living in the US and globally and reduced the cost of living significantly in the US across a wide range of products. In China, Trade has played a major role in increasing per capita GDP eightfold since 1990, from nearly 1,500 to over 11,500 US dollars. This translates into hundreds of millions of people moving poverty to middle income. And the upcoming swing in consumer demand, in purchasing power in the next 15 years from the old world, Europe and the US, to the Chinese market, will face the situation that more than 1/3 of total consumption worldwide is derived out of China. Ladies and gentlemen, trade has had a dramatic positive effect on the world. Now, what should we be doing as an industry to see that this continues? What issues and in the way of continuing the impressive track record? While our industry history is impressive, there are serious issues to address. Our job is to continue building on what Ricardo, McLean, and Deng and we have accomplished. I and everyone in this room derive their livelihood in one way or other from trade and transportation. So what is good for trade and transportation is good for us. It's also good for the world and the people who live in it. At this point, every keynote speaker has a decision to make. Should I be direct or even blunt in assessing the state of the industry and changes that should be made and risk saying things that some people may not agree with or even offended by? Or should I stick to safe topics that should be boring and not help in driving the debate, and that is needed if we are to keep progressing? I spent some years of my career as a banker, and bankers' primary job is to assess risks. Therefore, I know a little bit some things about risk-taking and its payoffs. Kuehne and Nagel has an own experience to prove of this. We have taken risks and sometimes we have failed. Now I'm trying of not failing for today by taking some risks. However, Kuehne and Nagel have succeeded often enough in the last 125 years and grown to become one of the leading global logistics providers and the largest NVO in the world. I will take some public speaking risks in this interest of progress and entertainment. I hope to come out of this with my and Kuehne and Nagel's reputation intact and spur some interesting conversation over lunch. I would like to present some thoughts, not intended to poke a finger in anyone's eyes, but to spur a healthy debate. In my approach, there are no good guys or bad guys, no white hats or black hats, just issues and problems all of us in the industry needed to address if we are to keep the industry on the same positive arc it's been on for the last 50 years. And while some might ask, what is this European guy doing coming to North America and telling us what to do? I would respond by saying that I don't want to tell anyone what to do, but just to suggest what we should be talking about. In any case, Kuehne and Nagel does have some standing in the discussion of the industry in North America, since we have a very large presence and financial investment here. The US is the second largest country in the Kuehne and Nagel network, has 5,000 employees in 45 offices. In the early 50s, we started our international expansion by opening offices in Toronto and Montreal. We are a global company, not a German or a Swiss company, and have a lot at stake in the success of the trade and transportation industry in the US and globally. In addition, our major shareholder, who shares our name, has a significant interest in a carrier that has been serving the US since 1857. I'll open with a topic close to my heart and pocketbook, relations between carriers and the NVOs. This relationship has tended to be fraught with suspicion and almost existential fears on both sides. Carriers and NVOs, as well as shippers, and the industry in general, would be better off if we all followed David Ricardo's lead and realized that NVOs and carriers have comparative advantages in different but complementary areas. If both focused on utilizing their comparative advantages rather than wringing their hands about being overtaken by the other, the global transportation network would function more effectively and both sides would do better financially. Carriers are better at asset acquisition, ownership and management, vessel network operations, and handling large single shipper volumes. NVOs, on the other side, are better at integrating multiple alliance networks to create a solution for a shipper, serving medium and small shippers, and at delivering uniform shipment data across multiple carriers. The need for carriers to establish and manage networks is never going away, and neither is the need for NVOs and forwarders to construct and manage solutions across the complicated landscape of international transportation. So let's back off the suspicion and fear and focus on those things we both do well. Kuehne and Nagel already utilize global partnership agreements to define and manage our carrier relationships, and would recommend them to all NVOs and carriers. To paraphrase, a large US-based global shipper, actually a Kuehne and Nagel customer, with more than 10,000 TEU and larger ships ready to come to the US, but facing inadequate infrastructure, the drayage business with its own set of significant problems, and the required new technology, a big question mark. We all face way too much uncertainty and risk in the future. End of quote. If I wanted to start a brawl in a conference like this, all I would need to say is North American terminals underperform the rest of the world in terms of intensity of the use of the three key assets of container terminals: berth space, gantry cranes, and terminal space. And that the average performance of North American terminal is well below the world average. Now, I'm not going to actually say this. It's a conditional. But Drury, a respected industry consultancy, said exactly this in its container terminal capacity and performance report in November last year. This is something most people in the industry have a sense it is true. But it's a very touchy subject, sort of the third rail in our business. But it's a sensitive issue that needs addressing. I suspect this topic strikes many nerves both because there are people here who agree, but may not want to be quoted saying it. Others who are directly involved in the infrastructure and labor parts of the business and feel that the sentiments expressed by Drury can certainly be understood given recent events on the West Coast. Both of these groups, the shippers wondering how the US is going to make needed improvements in its terminal infrastructure and related assets, such as chassis and drayage operations, and the people who own, run, or work in these areas, would agree that the US needs to improve. Steps have to be taken to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of facilities and surrounding activities for current vessel size and business activities as well as the future. There is no disagreement that changes and improvements are needed. The question is, what needs to change? Is it terminal physical plant? Is it the level of technology and automation? Is it labor work rules and contractual agreements? Is it the chassis operational and administrative structures? Is it terminal working hours? It's probably all of this. The bottom line is that US terminals, related infrastructure and systems like drayage and chassis are not up to dealing with the current level of activity, let alone future trade growth and even larger vessels. Yes, improvements are being made. The Bayonne Bridge is being raised. Middle Harbor is under development in Long Beach. Tiger grants will help development in Charleston, New York, Norfolk, and other ports. However, there are still big issues. Many cranes have to be raised and have their outreach extended. Yards and facilities need to be automated to allow limited terminal land to be used more effectively. The new chassis business model has to work. Rail capacity needs to keep pace. But let's be frank, the thorniest, most fought and most important issue we face is the interplay between labor and management. Without picking sides in this debate, it is safe to say that we have significant issues to face in the US. In the recent PMA ILW negotiations, as in most other labor negotiations, most of what is negotiated boils down to dollars and cents of the negotiating parties. Wages, benefits, pensions, and work rules pretty much all boil down to how much will be paid for the labor input, to the lifting of a container on or off a vessel, or moving it in or out of the yard and through the gate. These things are obviously of significant interest to the direct participants in the negotiations. They are the people who pay and receive the money being negotiated. However, I think both parties of these negotiations, management and labor, fail to incorporate other costs that are incurred outside the labor management relationship that have a direct and significant impact on the port's customers. And ultimately, these costs have a knock-on impact on the ports in general. From the outside, it almost appears as if the labor management relationship and negotiations take place independent of the port's customers' considerations, and as if their customers don't have alternatives. But, ladies and gentlemen, there are alternatives. Canadian ports, US East and Gulf Coast ports, and Mexican ports are alternative to the US West Coast. And near sourcing is the ultimate alternative to using US ports. Some examples of the costs that management and labor need to incorporate into their negotiations and day-to-day relationships are the cost to manufacturer of shutting down a line because a container is sitting on a vessel anchored offshore in San Pedro Bay. These costs are significant. They are not forgotten soon, and they will drive actions to avoid this kind of disruption in the future. This cost gets added to the sourcing decision and tilts the equation more towards locations and that don't necessitate using an US port. The cost to a retailer who has cargo delayed and misses a back-to-school promotion. In business, bad outcomes stay in the memory much longer than good outcomes and drive future actions and decisions. Missing a promotion is not forgotten soon. The cost to a fruit exporter of a box that sits rotting while waiting for labor negotiations to reach a settlement is not just the spoiled fruit. And, ladies and gentlemen, a much larger cost is a disappointed customer who was expecting the cargo but didn't get it. At the end of the day, businesses are resilient and adaptable, and they will find a way to meet the customer's requirement and make money doing the same. Conditions are moving in the direction of them being able to do this using alternative cargo routings that avoid labor disruptions and manufacturing in North America. These are real and real-time alternatives. I hope in the future that both management and stevedore labor understand this and that they are going to consider it during the negotiations and daily activities at the US ports. When we at Kuehne Nagel secure supply chain management business, we always have KPIs that are used to drive an effective and efficient supply chain and to measure our performance in order to serve our customers. These KPIs always include some measures of reliability, generally expressed as a percentage adherence to a target transit time. These KPIs are always 90% or higher. This is standard industry practice. On the other hand, carrier schedule reliability generally ranges between 65 to 85. And this is only the case in good years. C&L has recently published data that falls in this range across the carrier industry. There's obviously a problem when customers expect their cargo to move on time at least 90% of the time, and their providers of a significant portion of their supply chain services perform at 65 to 85. This dissonance normally gets handled by adding time to the anticipated transit time. And as we all know, time is money, so everyone ends up with a supply chain that performs differently than they want, and finally, at a higher cost. Why is that carrier schedule reliability ranges from 65 to 85 only in a general 90% world? I think part of the answer lies with the services level carriers can justify, given their ability to earn a return on the assets they have deployed. Various studies have estimated unsubsidized carrier cost of capital at 10 to 12%, while carrier industry returns over their business cycles are probably less than 5%. This disparity in cost and return creates a flow of about 10 billion per year from carriers and suppliers of capital to the carrier industry to users of ocean transportation services. So what we have today is a situation where customers of ocean carriers, Kuehne and Nagel included, are getting, let's call it, a discounted level of services, meaning 65 to 85% reliability that is subsidized to the tune of 10 billion US per year by the carriers and asset owners. This system is not going to work for long. Essentially, the users of the services are paying a discounted price for discounted services. I would guess that at some level, this arrangement might make sense, paying a low price for basically unreliable service. However, modern supply chains require higher reliability, and customers are asking for it. Getting services up to at least 90% reliability, or at least multiple product offerings with one level providing 90% or better at an appropriate price, would be a win-win for shippers and carriers. Shippers would get higher reliability that will bring down supply chain costs, and carriers would get a, let's call it, a financially appropriate rate given the service provided. These higher rates would need to support the added investment and cost required to reach the higher level of reliability. Carriers have done a great job of lowering costs by forming alliances and increasing ship size, but just about all this money, billions and billions of dollars since the early 80s, has been spent on offering lower rates on discounted services rather than on providing higher level services at undiscounted or premium rates. The pressure, ladies and gentlemen, the pressure on prices finally reduces the value of the negotiated product. This is true for the carriers and the shipper, this is true for the management and the worker, and this is true for a substantial part of our industry. Pressure on prices reduces the value of the services. I think it's time to offer a new solution, to be more flexible, to offer products discounted and enhanced. I'm not saying that the current level of services needs to end, but what I'm saying is the current reliability arrangement seems to work for many customers and much of the cargo that moves, but not for all of them. However, there needs to be a higher service choice. Maybe shippers have been too busy dealing with the collateral damage associated with the 65 to 85 service to try to push carriers to provide a legitimate choice of higher level or premium service, 90% plus service. We would all be better off if the realities of what is being sold and purchased today were openly discussed. I would be a you get what you pay discussion, a value-based pricing concept. This more direct or blunt conversation might lead to a broader service offering with both discounted and premium or 90% service offered, but at higher rates that reflect the level of services and the capital being involved. Would be people who ultimately pay the bill, the BCOs, be willing to pay for more reliable service choice? Question mark? I think they would. And that was the example at the beginning. The shirt is only 1%, is including only 1% in transportation and logistics cost. So at the end of the day, the BCO is on a per unit calculation, definitely more interested in the reliability than in in the negotiated price. The value, and that's exactly, to wrap it up, what I wanted to share with you today. The value is the core element which combines all of us. Economic values are connecting the dots. David Ricardo and the other two gentlemen, my question, who is paying the bill concerning the latest dispute here at the West Coast? And my third block in my short speech, the question and the relation between the shipping lines, the NBOs, and finally the BCOs. Think of values rather than of prices if you are going to talk in the upcoming 2 days. I do hope that I could add value to these thoughts and to you as a participant of this year's TPM conference. Thank you for the time. It has been an honor to address you today. Thank you very much.